This clip is going to continue describing the functions of the cerebral cortex, but this time we're going to be looking at the regions of the cerebral cortex in a much more specific manner. So to begin, let's revisit the frontal lobe, but this time let's look at the functional regions associated with it. The first one that we'll discuss is this corner, or this region right here. The functional region of the frontal lobe in this area is called the prefrontal cortex. And this is a region also known as the anterior association area or anterior association cortex, and is really important for processing things like emotion, decision making, and planning. A lot of aspects of your personality. Now, another region of the frontal lobe that we'll be discussing is motor control. So when we talk about motor control, there are two areas of your frontal lobe that are dedicated to performing these functions. So the first one is going to be what we call the premotor area, or the motor association area. So the premotor area or motor association. And this region right here is pretty much where we plan our behavior. So it's where the neurons can compile a program for the sequence of muscular contractions that need to occur for a specific action you're about to perform. Once this is determined, then this information is transmitted to yet another region in the brain, in the frontal lobe as well, that we call the primary motor cortex. And this is the part that is going to execute your movements. And it's very important to note here that this motor cortex is located anterior to the central sulcus. And the central sulcus is what divides the frontal lobe from the parietal lobe. So all of the regions that we've been discussing so far are occurring anterior to the central sulcus, which belongs to the frontal lobe. And so this right here is a bump or a gyrus that is functionally known as the primary motor cortex, but it's also referred to structurally as the precentral gyrus. And so this region right here is what is going to be able to ultimately cause and result muscle contractions. So primary motor cortex is going to be controlling voluntary muscle movements. And one thing that's very interesting about this gyrus is that this has what we call the motor homunculus. And this means that the gyrus has a distorted representation of all of our body regions, where it dedicates more surface area to control body regions that exhibit finer control. So for example, we have a lot of muscles and a lot of motor units dedicated to move our hands, fingers, and face. So because of that, the hands, fingers, and face occupy a greater region on this gyrus. And so this is what the motor homunculus means. So now let's go ahead and talk about language. What are the language centers in our brain? Still with the frontal lobe, we are going to be talking about the region right here called Broca's area. This is a region that is a little bit anterior and also superior to the temporal lobe. Broca's area is important for motor speech. And what this means is your ability to speak. Damage to this area results in what we call non-fluent aphasia, where the individual or the patient is not able to speak coherently, so they have trouble choosing words, trouble speaking, or slow speech. Another region associated with language is located posterior to Broca's area, but in the parietal lobe, so at the junction between the parietal and the temporal lobe. This is called Wernicke's area. Both of those regions are predominantly, or are on the left side in the predominant population. And so Wernicke's area is not so much important for speaking or motor speech, but it's important to understand written and spoken language. So it's more so for language comprehension. Lesions in this area result in what we call fluent aphasia. So the patient is able to speak, however, the words are not coherent or they do not make sense. For example, they may say chos for chair, so they're not able to perceive or understand language.